Hello everyone, I hope you had a good weekend. I apologize for my sniffly nose. I think it's coronavirus. I had a video come across my YouTube feed this week about midday flying, and I believe it trivialized the idea of midday flying. So at risk of getting into an internet mudslinging match, I am going to throw my opinion on the whole topic of midday flying into the arena of PPG discourse. I think if you're a new pilot and you saw that video, you really deserve to have a second take on what this whole midday discussion is even about. So what's happening during midday that makes this even something we need to think about? In the morning and evening, incoming solar radiation strikes the Earth's surface at such a shallow angle that it doesn't impart a lot of heat energy into the surfaces that it's striking. During midday, particularly when the sun is closest to perpendicular to the ground and thereafter, the surfaces that are down on the ground really absorb a lot of energy, and that energy that's absorbed is re-released into the atmosphere, and everyone knows that if we heat air, it's going to start rising. Something else interesting happens down here at the ground level. Occasionally, some of the excited heated molecules in the air bounce off of water on the ground, whether it's in puddles or pond surfaces or dew on a leaf, and there's enough energy that it knocks some water molecule up into the atmosphere. It's a state change from liquid to gas for the water. Eventually, these parcels have enough upwards push or energy that they break off of the ground and start cruising upwards through the atmosphere. In normal circumstances, the temperature decreases as you increase in altitude. So imagine now we've got our bubble that's filled with moisture, and it's lifting up through the atmosphere and continually getting cooler and cooler the higher it gets, until a certain point. When it reaches a temperature called the dew point, it's trying to hold more water than it has a capacity for, and water starts to slough out of it. This is condensation. So when you're looking out there on a nice hot summer day and you see this layer of clouds forming, those are called cumulus clouds, and they're forming because these parcels of air have lifted up off the ground and they've cooled to a point where any further cooling causes the water to come out, and that's where our cloud base is. I think of this whole system down below the dew point, where solar radiation is heating parcels of air and the parcels are lifting up through the atmosphere, as like engine number one, and the engine is the sun. There's a second engine that in the right atmospheric conditions will start to fire, and that engine is the heat that is released through condensation. In order for us to put that water into the parcel of air, evaporate it, we needed energy to do that. So when we take the parcel of air and up into the atmosphere and want to state change the water back from vapor to liquid, we have to release the energy that was binding it in there. So as this water sloughs out of this cloud, we're releasing a second form or a second heat source. If the conditions in the atmosphere are right and engine number one is strong enough, eventually engine number two really kicks in and engages, and we take these cumulus clouds and start to mature them into this different type of cloud called a cumulonimbus cloud, which is a thunderstorm. Okay, that's the thermal cycle. It's this diurnal process of heating and cooling of the Earth's surface and thus the Earth's atmosphere that causes this type of turbulence called convective turbulence. And when we talk about should you be flying midday, that's really what we're talking about. Okay, we know how the thermals work and why we're even having this discussion. Let's talk about some of the risks that might catch a newer pilot unaware if you go out and fly these conditions and you don't have the proper training or the proper experience. First off is difficulty in launch and landing. In thermic conditions, a field that you're launching out of goes through this cycle. And the beginning of the cycle, this dome of warm air is building up. And that dome kind of blocks the prevailing wind from getting in. And you'll notice that your windsocks have gone slack. As the dome builds upwards energy and lifts off of the ground, the wind wants to backfill that area that the bubble just left, and the winds will get switchy and unpredictable as air tries to equalize underneath that bubble. Then finally, the wind will go back to the normal prevailing direction and speed until another bubble forms and the cycle repeats itself. So launching and landing in these thermic conditions require a few tricks and understanding the nature of that cycle so you can get off of the ground and back in without landing with a tailwind or coming in for landing and suddenly all your headwind dropped off and you're getting dumped into the ground. The second risk that we face is just the obvious risk of collapse, an increased risk of collapse that you're going to experience anytime you're flying in turbulence. And this is something that paragliders have to deal with, and over time your skills develop and you're able to catch the collapses before they actually occur. But that takes flight time, and it takes an understanding of why the collapses are happening and a feel for your wing that's instinctive. Another big difference between paragliding and paramotoring in thermic conditions is the launch. When a paraglider launches off the mountain, they're running away from the mountain, their glider goes into full glide with a low angle of attack, and off they go searching for their first thermal. On the other hand, a paramotor pilot takes off and we're trying to get ourselves safety and altitude quickly with power, and that power also comes with an increased angle of attack. So paraglider's going out, away, and down. A paramotor's going up with a higher angle of attack. And that higher angle of attack is a really big consideration on your climb out in any kind of turbulent condition. It has to be managed skillfully. We go through this zone on our launch in thermic conditions where I wouldn't want to count on a reserve properly deploying. So from the ground up to a certain altitude, 300, 400, 500 feet, maybe more, you're in this area where your safety equipment may not have time to deploy, and that's also the strongest, most unorganized area of turbulence that you're going to encounter on your flight until you make it up to the dew point. So it's a particularly dangerous time in thermic conditions when you're launching, trying to get to a safe altitude. Another important concern to be aware of when you're flying thermic conditions is the ever-changing nature of the atmosphere. It's not unheard of for conditions to be very nice for thermaling, and an hour later, 30 minutes later, the atmosphere is starting to overdevelop and the instability in the atmosphere is increasing. And if you're not just hyper aware of what's going on around you, you can suddenly find yourself in conditions that far exceed your ability or your aircraft's ability to maintain stable flight. If you have decided that midday flying is something that you want to tackle, here's my advice on how to go about doing it. The first and most important thing I can suggest is go find a paragliding school and go through a paragliding course. It's going to cost you some money, but the lessons you will learn are invaluable. They will teach you how to read the terrain, how to read the atmosphere, how to handle your glider in those conditions. It's just, you can't put a price on it, I don't think, and there's no substitute for getting paragliding training before you start doing it with a paramotor. The next thing I would suggest is if you've been flying a higher rated wing, like a C-rated wing or a D-rated wing, notch yourself back to an A or maybe a B glider as you start to learn thermic conditions. The inherent safety of an A glider will really benefit you in the long run as you're learning to fly in this kind of turbulence. And those hotter gliders, the C's and D's, they're not very forgiving if you make a mistake, and you're going to make mistakes as you learn to fly turbulence. Two important things that I cannot stress enough about midday flying. You have to have a reserve. It has to be maintained properly. You have to know how to use it. You have to practice using it in your head, build muscle memory in using your reserve. When you're choosing to go out in these turbulent conditions, there's a very good chance that you might have to pull that one day, and you need to be ready, and it needs to be ready as well. And finally, if you don't have your head around your weather, study. You have to understand the dynamics of the atmosphere before you go tackle it. If you don't understand how pressure changes the atmosphere or how temperature and humidity work together to form unstable conditions, you need to understand those things before you go fly in it. I hope this is helpful. I hope it gives you some things to think about. If thermic flying is something that you want to get into, there is definitely a safe pathway to do it, but the prerequisite is not just to be able to kite up the side of a wall. It takes a lot more than that. It takes time, it takes experience, it takes training, it takes self-study. There's definitely a safe way to do it, but don't just just because you saw a video that said, yeah, anybody can do it. Trust me, get some experience and get some help before you go do it. It's not trivial. Thanks everyone for watching this. I noticed the other day we have 250 subscribers, and in the YouTube world, that's not a huge number, but I was thinking about 250 people. That's like a whole high school auditorium filled up, waiting to hear what I have to say, and that's kind of humbling. So I appreciate that you guys are interested in what I have to say, and I'm going to keep making some videos. Originally, I wanted to make 25 videos, which was one a week until our season started back up. But I'm having a lot of fun doing it. It's way more challenging than I ever thought it would be. I'm getting better, I'm getting faster. But again, if you have any topics that you'd like to hear me talk about, fire away, let me know. I'll be glad to see if I can put it together. Have a good week.